if you could tell me about you during Shankars Weekly and the atmosphere at the time.
Shankars Weekly, my first cartoon was printed by Shankar. So, I mean, it was distance cartooning. I was in college in Palghar. Shankars Weekly was in Delhi. Shankars Weekly was open to contribution, so young cartoonists would send their stuff. I also sent my stuff. It got published. Then I started getting published fairly regularly. The first cartoon I think got published in '72. It was on Vietnam. Vietnam war was on very much on. Vietnam was very close to the political kind of campus that we had in Kerala. Vietnam seemed next door, closer to Palghar than Trichy. It was so in many campuses in Kerala and Bengal. So because I was basically in a very political campus, I must have been fairly political. So this was a cartoon, and this cartoon got printed by Shankar. Then I started getting published off and down, more or less regularly. Then Shankar sent me a letter dictated to his to the person who was running, the editor who was running the weekly, in which he said, you seem to be regularly drawing, so you please take note of a few things, which is, he said that you should master the art of caricature, which you do by getting the likeness first and then distorting. Not straight away distorting the first time you see a face. Stuff like that. All sage advice, very professional advice. Sad that I lost that letter in the middle of many home moving that I have done. It was a nice letter. And then I started getting published regularly. I also used to get paid. Shankar was very keen that you must get paid for what you're doing. Little money or whatever money was paid. It was nice. Then the emergency came and Shankars Weekly folded up within months. The emergency was June 75. Shankars Weekly folded up in September. They departed with a souvenir, which I still have. It's a slightly fat collection of the compilation of their best work. Shankars Weekly was very unique. Shankars Weekly was again, as you said, the homing ground of the second generation of Indian professional cartoons. If you hold Shankar as the first of professional cartoons. Shankar, one thing very, very unique about Shankar was that he allowed a variety of styles to function. Though he was considered a very powerful kind of a leader, who radiated immense power, certainty of craft and so on, which he had. He trained himself after the first 7 years in Hindustan Times. He went on a 1-year sabbatical to London and trained at the best of places in London. London Polytechnic and places like that where he trained to draw, actually model drawing and stuff like that. And also interacted with people like David Lowe, who was the first big model for Indian editorial cartooning. Sir David Lowe, true, I mean, major cartoonists. Shankar met the world's best cartoonists who were in Fleet Street at the time, London. So he came back with this kind of certainty of craft, plus as a powerful person who was a good organizer, ran the weekly, visionary, man of stature, like the first generation freedom fighters and freedom people who were associated with the nation building, first generation nation builders had a certain kind of stature, which he shared. But he was extremely democratic to his quote-unquote disciples. He allowed them to draw whichever way they liked. Though he would be free with comment, he would probably disapprove, but he would still let them do what they liked. So that is very evident. That is why you find a clear variety of styles in the second generation Indian cartoon. Abu Abraham, O.V. Vijayan, they had absolutely no, visual correlation with Shankar. They completely removed from Shankar's style. Kutti followed Shankar up to a point. Kutti was the prime disciple who Shankar himself trained. Up to a point, Kutti followed. Kutti also departed. But he also departed very crucially. I mean, in a very crucial manner he departed in terms of detailing and form. He had a very different style of his form. And he was the first Indian cartoonist to develop a very functional style of drawing. Though his style was very, very structured, not a slap dash kind of a style. Very structured style, but he completely departed from the carefully orchestrated kind of a Shankar cartoon. It's like a choreographed cartoon where everything was in the right place, like the old time filmmakers. The frames would be classical frames, everything in place. That kind of cartooning is what Shankar did. 20, 30 recognizable faces in a cartoon, and everyone will be in the right place. You will be able to make out about 30 fellows in a cartoon. And of course, it was displayed generously in Hindustan Times across 4, 5, 6 columns. Sometimes deep, half a page in depth and so on. But that style Kutti departed from. When the cartoons got shrunk a little to 3 columns and 4 columns, mostly 3 columns at the time in the 60s. Kutti adapted to that, and Kutti also developed a style of doing something very functionally, cutting out the inessentials. He started cropping the cartoon. So you will have he started cropping. The look and the feel of the cartoon changed. It was a variety of styles that flourished, and this is very different from Disney, for instance. Disney, when he ran Walt Disney ran the animation studio, another organized setup. Everybody was asked to do more or less an assembly line kind of work, uniform work, which is necessary for animation. I am not saying anything against Disney, not taking anything away from his work. But the point is that Indian cartooning became, in terms of variety, much richer, despite the fact that all of them went to a Gurukula like Shankar. You can want to call it, you can call it Shankar Gurukula. The variety was very, that pedagogy is very interesting. In fact, in an art practice, it has seldom happened.
And I know this is probably not very chronological, but I was wondering, where does someone like Maya Kamath come in?
It took about 2 generations. In between, say, Kutti Vijayan, Shankar Kutti Vijayan, Shankar Kutti Lakshman, again, not part of the Shankar school, but outside. Then comes Rajinder Puri, Abu Abraham, O.V. Vijayan and Rajinder Puri in the chronological order. But they are, you can treat them as a band of editorial cartoonists who did excellent work. Then parallelly Mario, who did a very different kind of cartooning, non-political cartooning, and Sudhir there. Maya Kamath comes after that. Maya Kamath is my generation. And she also probably started professional cartooning a little later, after me. I started in 77. Joined the Hindu in 77. Maya must have, I don't know whether she did any sustained professional cartooning at that time. I have not noticed. Maybe early 80s she did. And then later, in the early 90s into the work she did for Asian Age when it started.
So we were talking about Shankars Weekly, and you mentioned how the style permitted everyone to do whatever they chose to work in their very specific
permitted would be condescension.
True.
There was an atmosphere where, I mean, the outcome was all that we know. I don't know how Shankar worked. I never met him. But if you look at the outcome, that weekly created a variety of house styles. And it didn't have a common house style, it created a variety of personal styles. And cartooning truly evolved from then on. It moved a lot from where Shankar left it off.
So how did the rest of the industry react to Shankars Weekly? And how did it react after it folded up? Like, what were the after ripples of it?
I don't know, because I must have been a late kind of a reader, because Shankars Weekly was there from 1948, the year after independence. It was inaugurated by Jawaharlal Nehru. I must have started reading Shankars Weekly from the 60s, late 60s. Prior to that, I couldn't have been able to make out anything in it, because it was all political cartoons and very good political writing, excellent writing. In fact, looking back, it had as interesting writing as graphic work. It had radio reviews, it had film reviews, it had excellent political articles. I also remember having read a brilliant piece on physics in Shankars Weekly. Extremely well written. One good thing about the Shankars Weekly is much of the writing that was done in it is very good. It was refreshingly light, sarcastic, very humorous, sometimes dead serious, but written very well. It did not have the heaviness of the prose that you normally saw in the newspapers and stuff like that, because it sort of presented itself as a humorous magazine. It was not actually humorous, it was smart. It had very good smart writing, its profile of the personality of the week was as good as the New Statesman profile. It was the best in the world. And it had an editorial on the front page, I mean the first page inside, not the cover. It's called Free Thinking. It was for a long time written by the legendary journalist called M. Chalapati Rao, MC. Later by C.P. Ramachandran, Edathattu Narayan. Some of the guys who wrote for it are some of the finest journalists were all friends of Shankars. Vijayan wrote. And Shankars Weekly carried on for many years. And it produced some of the finest work of Vijayan on the cover and so on during the Vietnam War. When Shankar wasn't drawing the cover, mostly Vijayan did the cover. He produced some of the finest political cartoons I have seen on the cover of the Shankars Weekly in the 70s. And the whole cover was big. It used to look very powerful. Then it had on the last page a cartoonist whom I can't stop talking about, Julius Pfeiffer. It was that sequential cartoons. I mean, it is beautiful, absolutely out of this world, brilliant sequential cartooning. A master of the medium, Julius Pfeiffer. He is again another person who, in a certain sense, anticipated the graphic novel. There was brilliant sequential narration in it. He also went on to become a dramatist. He did some plays like Manjula. Manjula is also a playwright. And so on.
And like Arvindan.
Arvindan films. And also plays. He did costume for plays. Arvindan did a lot of costume for plays. Kavalans. Kavalan Nanika Naran did the stylized plays. Arvindan did the costume. For all his plays, he did the costume. He has also directed plays.
This was around the same time when Charya Manusham Velilokam was like
Charya Manusham Velilokam, see, if you ask me personally, the biggest influence on me was Charya Manusham Velilokam. To begin with, and even today. It is still the best influence on me. I marvel by that work. And I am happy that I was in an environment where I was able to grow up with it. Because that is part of the Madhubhumi Weekly. It appeared on the last page of the Madhubhumi. And Madhubhumi Weekly was a part of a Malabar household. I mean, any kind of a middle class Malabar home which was barely literate would subscribe to the Madhubhumi Weekly. At least it will be there in the neighborhood. 1 out of 5 houses in the neighborhood will have this weekly. And it showcased the best of literary talent at the time in Malayalam. And if you had to become a writer of repute, you had to break into literature, you had to get published in Madhubhumi Weekly. I mean, it was a kind of like Desh in Bengali. It's some kind of a benchmark. That if you're writing for Madhubhumi, you're a major writer. That used to carry Arvindan on the last page. 13 years it went on from 61 to 74. It's a narrative comic which almost ended up as a graphic novel. It was not intended to be a graphic novel. It did not start off with a plot or a script. It was a weekly, once a week reaction to the social events around, with one cast of characters, a set of characters. But Arvindan was so open-ended. His approach to entire art, which became more clear when he started making films. Almost like musicians, he was very fond of music. He was himself a musician also. It is like music. He a musician, an Indian musician, for instance, doesn't follow a very fixed pattern, but he achieves a lot of coherence by allowing music to happen. If you theoretically ask somebody to explain how someone sustains a raga, it will be very difficult to explain. How can you explain how somebody cycles or somebody swims? It's very difficult to theoretically explain. Same way, a trained singer sustains a raga, doesn't deviate from the raga at all. There's a lot of improvisation without any linear pattern. This is the same way Arvindan, I think, did that cartoon. He left it open, right from the beginning he left it open, he didn't close it. I think he suppressed any temptation to close the cartoon at any point. He kept on opening it up and exploring as far as possible. So the same set of characters evolved, they physically evolved. They don't look the same.
They don't.
They grow up as you and me grow up. This is again a technique that was done in cartooning abroad a little bit earlier, but more consistently again in Doonesbury. Doonesbury, if you look at American cartooning history, they will say that Trudeau did it for the first time. Trudeau didn't do it for the first time, even in American cartooning. Somebody had done it before. It doesn't matter. Again, takes nothing away from anybody. It's not an athletic record that we are going to talk about. But Aravindan did it without any fuss. In a country, we are not used to this in any language in India, even today. Our comic characters stay the same. Lakshman's common man stays at an uncertain age of 50 or something. I have a common man who is a boy, who is about 6 or 7 years or 10 years, I think. And the boy stays the same, more or less. But here was a cartoonist who did it without any fuss, and nobody even thought about it. People just read it and accepted it. It was amazing.
Do you think the possibility of that existed more because this was a sequential thing, unlike
It was certainly not. Certainly, it was a sequential thing. Only in a sequential thing you handle a set of characters. No, though strictly speaking, there is no bar, even in a single cartoon, to make your character organically older as you go by. It would be hardly noticed. It can be done. But in a sequential cartooning, everybody evolved, the entire setting evolved. Your setting evolved, your ambience evolved.
So how do you, for instance, make the choice to decide that your lens, this boy, is going to remain the same age, or how is that something that?
No, mine is a very restricted medium. It's not. I told you, it's not as half as creative as what Aravindan did or any street cartoonist, independently social cartoonist or a literary cartoonist. I am completely driven by news. I am paid to do news cartooning. That's what I have been doing all my life. So I am restricted by news. For me, it is just a device. It is functional. So I can't do much with it. Already, there is the uncertainty of news in this country. News is getting broken by more than one medium. Earlier, it used to be a far more settled operation. Today's newspapers, you read till tomorrow's newspapers came, you would normally not be threatened by a news break. I mean, unless somebody dies or the radio announces it, or there's an election going on, the results come out in between, and you get to hear it on the radio. With television, news breaking has become a compulsive hourly or half-hourly threat to a cartoonist. And there's a huge debate on what exactly constitutes news. Those are more and more uncertainties. And so during the day, I have to second guess what would be the top of the mind story tomorrow morning. And then think of my cartoon. That my cartoon will have to be on that. So I don't have much time to creatively shuffle with anything that I have. So I have settled for a very simple device, this character. I use whenever it is proper to use it. So I keep it very simple and functional. So I can't invest much more energy on that character itself. Character is as much tossed about by news as I am. It might have also acquired a character over a period of time because it has gone through a certain political process.
What are some of the signature stances that by now you've come to recognize as that probably are smile-inducing for you also by now, because it's either something that's located in nostalgia or it's something that you grin about yourself when you see this replicated in real life, because you know that by now it's something that you're consciously employing in your work.
I don't impose anything on a character, rarely so. The character as you watch the person in real life, on TV or in real person, the politicians, the newsmakers, they will give you suggestions. There is a certain way they behave. That my visual interpretation emanates from there. I have not given any of them. I hardly can remember. I don't recall any instance of me imposing a certain grid on any any person.
Why you think that there are so few women political cartoonists?
Oh, there are. I don't know why. There is actually there is no explanation for this even abroad. Abroad, I mean, means US or UK. There have been very bright women cartoonists and yes, and all that in the US. But even here we have Maya Kamath, and we have had Maya Kamath, and Manjula has dropped out after doing brilliant work. Why, I don't know. But I can tell you one thing: in graphic novels, the world over, it's a very interesting demographic, a significant readership of the graphic novel. A good chunk of readers are women. And some of the finest creators are also women. Satrapi. Many, even our own people here, Amrita Patel. Many women, even the first generation, second generation graphic novel tradition, there are significant women creators. So one has to figure out why. There can't be any inherent aversion to the comic medium, then you couldn't have been a graphic creator, graphic novelist. It's as comical or even more comical than the daily cartoon.
Have you ever felt a desire to kind of push towards a sequential sort of strip?
I have done quite a few stuff.
Okay.
After Aravindan, I am usually credited with short narratives, graphic narratives, not long. Short narratives, but with a plot, graphic stories. I have done quite a few graphic stories in Malayalam, 15 pages, 20 pages, 18 pages. I am also working on a novel. It should make me fairly unpopular in Kerala, about Palkar.
Okay.
In English also I have done a few short stuff. We have also done some very graphic reportage, sequential graphic reportage in Indian Express.
Yeah.
Something about the Maruti car, Maruti 800 space tower.
Yeah.
I did a full page stuff on it.
In fact, like speaking of comics journalism, I know that someone named Nick Savsanis in Columbia University recently produced his PhD dissertation in entirely comics format. And in his proposal pitch, he spoke about how his grandmother would tell him stories and how the telling of the stories was always so non-linear because memory was so patchworky and she would remember things midway. So one of the best ways that he was able to interpret his grandmother's stories were to talk about them in a comics format. That where just only words or only images wouldn't do justice to the telling to the depth of a story. So you needed both.
Text as well as image.
Yeah. And I find that comics journalism is actually like entire stories are happening instead of long form, and I was wondering if there was a scope to push for that.
Even in comics there is scope for longer form.
Okay.
See,
How do you mean?
Yeah, I tell you, if somebody were to ask me to go and spend the next 6 weeks, 7 weeks in Bihar and do something on elections, it will eventually become something in the context of elections on Bihar. If I have the freedom to interpret it that way, I might go and keep on sketching, talking to people, walking around, driving around, and might come back eventually with a book-length comic, graphic novel.
Yeah.
It's possible, not me, anybody.
Yeah.
So such possibilities. This Joe Sacco has done
Yeah.
on Palestine.
On Kushinagar as well. Yeah.
He's done much work on the other guy, the French, what's his name? He did on Burma, he did something on Jerusalem. Guy Elise.
Burma Chronicles, is
No,
it?
Guy Elise or something.
Okay.
I've got the books here.
Okay.
I'm an avid reader of graphic novels.
Oh. Okay.
And my master was sitting right behind Will Eisner.
Yeah, I remember there was this Will Eisner quote that said something about if my comics are able to tell people that there's more that you can tell in comics than an alien or a monster killing somebody, then I think I would have done my work in comics.
He was able to do the whole range of emotions.
Yeah.
Not just humor or wit.
Yeah.
He evolved from Spirit was his comic, into graphic. His first graphic novel was when he was 61.
Oh, really?
1978, my contract with God
My
and
God.
other tenement stories.
Yeah.
Brilliant, absolute master. He's like Aravind, he's a master.
Yeah.
I don't think we've had another master like him, though according to me Spiegelman comes very close to him. And Spiegelman is still pushing down the
Yeah. Yeah.
pushing frontiers.
Yeah.
Very, very bright. That in the shadow of no towers is absolutely path-breaking. It should be taught in all journalism institutes, if you ask me.
Is there any playing with time in a single in a single panel cartoon ever?
Single panel cartoon, very little. Single panel means kind of cartoons that we
But, yeah.
one frame.
Yeah.
No.
No.
It is almost instantaneous.
Okay. Hmm. Hmm.
Though there is, I mean, you do take a little time scanning it,
Hmm.
maybe 10 seconds, 20 seconds to look at it.
Hmm.
Effectively, it is like looking at a photograph, frame.
Hmm.
It's a frame
Hmm.
or a panel.
Hmm. So the effect of it.
Time doesn't move.
Yeah. So the effect of it needs to be immediate. Like the punchline needs to hit you.
Yeah.
immediately
Punchline
when you
needs
see it.
to either hit you, provoke you, confuse you, befuddle you. It has to create whatever it is meant to create. It has to set off a chain of thought or feeling in you.
Yeah.
That has to happen fast.
So I could call it the middleman within an already existing chain of events. For instance, your recent OROP frame. I know that OROP is an ongoing thing. Protests are still carrying on, and suddenly I see this. So and then it will elicit feelings from me, which will probably influence the news that I see of OROP after this also. That is going to happen.
It's like any other comment, the same thing that an editorial does, or somebody comments on radio or television.
Yeah.
That comment will in some way frame your sense of that series of events
Yeah.
differently.
Yeah.
If you have been influenced by the comment, or if you don't like the comment, again, I mean, you have a view on what is happening, you have a take on what's happening, and then suddenly you hear a comment. So either that simplifies the matter for you, or provokes you, or confuses you. I mean, so it has a certain, it changes the course, it resets the course.
Yeah.
That's the most neutral way of putting it.
Yeah. Yeah.
When the resetting could be zero.
Because I remember sharing this particular single panel cartoon strip that was prepared by a Sri Lankan cartoonist named Avant. Okay, I forget his second name, but it basically had the recent child from the Kurdish child who had actually passed away, and the child was surrounded by crocodiles who were crying, and each of the crocodiles were named UN, EU, USA, and normally when I share something on social media, people normally don't read it, but because this was an image, it elicited
No, the image
immediate
itself
reaction.
had great traction. Great traction. Because that image made a difference. What happens when you look at the gutter? What is that feeling you get?
I know that further actions have taken place in the sequence that had begun in the previous frame. So I kind of imagine as to what had happened. That quickly flashes through my mind, and then I come to the next sequence.
Next panel.
Next panel.
Okay, fine. There's the page, the panel, the gutter, and the page itself. See, page, when you look at the page itself, page is the architecture. Page is a certain architecture, which is what gives this narration an overall feeling of cohesion. You begin a graphic novel, start reading it, a comic story. The page is set in a certain way, page after page. You move from one page to the next from there. So there has to be a sense of continuity and cohesion. That comes from the page, from the way the page is done. Within that, you can play around with sequences and so on to create different senses of time. Either if I want the reader to spend more time on it, the real time on it, read slower, if I want my reader to read slower, there is a certain way of doing the page. Then if I want the reader to get a sense of time, which is different from the sense of time that was there in the previous couple of pages, let's say, then there's another way of doing the page. The emphasis happens through the panels on the page. The panels, you can really play around with the panel. You would have seen how the second sequence, second part of Mouse, Spiegelman has one frame where a single image has been cut into several little panels.
Yeah.
A single image is cut into little panels where time flows from panel to panel.
Yeah.
And overall image on the page is a single image, which is actually fragmented. These are innovative ways of doing it. You get an extremely different sense of actually time moving and phenomenal tension, angst and stillness of the character. That kind of feeling is visually created. There are many other ways of doing things. So the point is that what the success of a graphic artist is how well, how swiftly, easily the reader turns the page. And when you turn the page, you also pause. Somewhere you have begun a movement, if you use a musical metaphor, and you have brought it to a closure. There's a kind of fade out or a closure or a cut, whatever you want to do, you do at the end of the page. Then you turn into the next page. In the old comic books, it was all regular because they didn't play around very much they hardly played around with the panels, size of the panel or anything. Even if you look at a comic strip, a syndicated comic strip, the old comic strips all have 4 panels. Which every action, then the action begins, ends, over. Same way the Archie's comics are. They don't do very much with the panels. Story is told, but even there, they will throw in something interesting enough for you to turn the page. You asked me more about the new age comics, so I'm an old world cartoonist.
How have things changed for you?
Still changing.
Yeah.
I told you my primary influence is a man who was way ahead of his times. So I have just kept in pace with Aravind.
Yeah.
I keep running with Aravind. He is still running with me.
You would
Balamurali
purchase those.
Krishna came there. Music. Pannalal Ghosh, Hindustani music. Malayali would have read these names for the first time from Aravind. Then all the existentialist writers. Books like Greening of America were mentioned. And Aravind even did an English wordplay called Coca-Colonization in the cartoon. US were, way ahead.
Yeah.
And the fact was that generation of Malayali accepted it without a demo. That is, the readership is equally interesting for me. It's not just the creator who is interesting.
Yeah.
Because my mother's generation grew up on it. I mean, they grew up, they were already old.
Yeah.
They moved with it. And I would hear her cousins, my China, nieces and all that, older to me. When in the morning when they go on the way to the temple or back, which is mandatory, they would peep in and ask my mother, has Ramu got a job? On every Wednesday, this question I would hear. Because Wednesday is when the ROP Weekly comes.
Yeah.
They were all anxious to find out whether the protagonist has got a job.
Yeah.
Because Ramu became a real person almost.
Yeah, and then he grew up to be this slightly manipulative.
I got it in the middle.
Okay.
The strips started in 61. I must have started looking at it in 67, 68, 65. When what appeals to you is the comic part of it.
Yeah.
The comicality as a child. I'm very fond of the comic. The bear comic, which is today an emoticon. Then slowly you start reading it and catching up with it. And at some point I went back and looked at the entire archives, which an uncle of mine had collected.
Okay.
And then of course we went with the, from 68 and all that I was following it regularly, week after week.
Yeah. Yeah.
So some of it I sourced like a book, some of it I sourced like a periodic.
What did you mention about the raw comic as emoji today?
As emoticon.
Yeah.
The raw comic is very simple, and if you draw a line like that, it's a laughter. If you draw a line like this, it's a frown. I mean, if human emotions can be handled with such simplicity.
True.
I mean, there's something about it. I mean, if the brain, something to do with the brain map.
Yeah.
It's probably closest to your raw emotions.
Even though I've had friends complain that like the emoticons that are available on the phone tend to be very linear and they find it very inadequate and yet I find a lot of people expressing angst.
Yeah, because it comes in conjunction with text.
Yeah.
Or in place of text.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes it suggests sound.
Hmm.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
It is part of a richer communication today. It's not merely textual. It's not merely voice. It's a lot of visual, a lot of graphic.
Yeah, I sometimes find people only using emoticons to communicate.
No, alphanumericals also.
Yeah.
You write GR and then 8.
Yeah. Yeah.
To say great.
Yeah.
It's actually an alphanumerical.
Yeah. From when you were working, you worked for the Hindu, you mentioned.
I started with the Hindu.
Okay. How things have changed for you in differing political climates that we've had. Have you in any way pushed yourself, restrained yourself in terms of how you respond to the incumbent previous governments?
Well, the last part of the question I'll answer later. The first part is many things have changed. It was a much more settled affair when I was with the Hindu. You looked at today's newspaper and read more than one paper, listen to probably the radio at the most, and then you fairly guess what would be tomorrow's subject for comment. It's no longer so. After satellite television, in India, news breaking has become an ongoing process. It's a 24-hour operation. So that has changed your work style. Which in effect means that when if you look at it dramatically between the Hindu and the Indian Express where I'm working today, ours is a very news-hungry newspaper, Indian Express in Delhi. I mean, northern editions. And there's a cartoon on front page every day. So it has to somehow seem very current and go with the scheme of things on the front page. So I can't comment on stale news or news that has been overtaken. So I have to be with the news. So half my effort today is to generally keep following the news as it evolves, various streams of news, and then generally find out, at least make some kind of an estimate on what is likely to be the top of the mind story the next day. So it's become more arbitrary, more less certain, more uncertain, and hence more creative, more spontaneous. So your entire craft had to become more of an instant craft, and you can't deliberate too much when you decide upon a story at the end of the day, or when there's a sudden news break at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, you have to change your cartoon. That's another thing, you have to keep updating your work now. If something major happens that overtakes your cartoon. So your craft again has to become very simple and very, very open to new technologies of transmission and scanning and so on. So you can use all your technological tools to process your work. Again, processing is done by the cartoonist himself today. Earlier we used to draw and hand it over to the block maker in my first phase. Hindu still had a block maker. And he was a great artisan and he would make an excellent block out of it, and then eventually it will get printed. Now you scan your stuff and send it. And if you just have a mobile camera, you take a good picture of it, or you scan it with your mobile camera and you can send it off. You may email it. So, I mean, your basic processing you do, and then you transmit it. The office receives the image today, not the original. And the image is processed by the design guys. They will clean it up and then fit it into the page. Basically, the format and all remains the same, and you can probably operate within the A4. You can't write very big because most of your scanners are A4 or less. That apart, I mean, nothing much has changed. But the way you work has changed, and your craft has evolved into a slightly quicker, something that lends itself to quicker execution. You can't take too much time with drawing today, which means that you probably have to stay in practice. See, the Indian cartoon is unlike the American cartoonists do some 60 to 70 pages in a year, because our quality is very varied and very wide and so on. So you have to stay in practice with your caricatures. So you have to stay in practice. The craft naturally would have changed, otherwise you wouldn't have been able to cope with this pace. The pace of news has changed. It's become faster. That's been a major change. Second change, technology. Technology has changed vastly to make this possible. To be able to respond to this quick pace, technology is a big help. Then Photoshop, your digital software, all that is helpful.
Could you kind of explain your technique specifically?
My technique basically remains the same. I do a pencil drawing and then ink it and rub out the pencil sketches. And then I process it. I have an original, but I may not today, I don't fill in everything in the original. Like, you have a large black to be filled in. If there is no time, or even if you have time, you don't have to fill in the black. You can process it, get a scan, and then process it on the Photoshop Adobe. You can fill all enclosed areas with the digital black, which is available. There are two advantages there. One is that it's quicker. It is absolutely even, flat. Third advantage is that the memory of that black that you get, a large area of black, will be it takes up much less memory than the processed work out of a hand and brush, a stroke or a brush, a volume of black that you create with the hand. Because it's a suggestion. So your file becomes lighter, so it gets transmitted quicker. So lots of such advantages. So it's a large area to be filled up with black or any color. You can use the Photoshop to do that instead of having to actually work with the hand. Unless you want to create a gradient. I mean, that is a different matter. Even a gradient you can do with the Photoshop up to a point, but that will be mechanical.
Yeah. Something struck me about how you mentioned that because the Indian Express is a news-hungry paper, so news and reaction to it has to be instantaneous. And I remember speaking to two people who happened to be in Bombay at the time of the 92 and 93 riots, and one was a photojournalist, the other was a painter. And the photojournalist, of course, had to be on the scene all the time. And he told me that he had produced a large body of work at the time of the riots. And the painter had kind of let his responses and memories of it fester for a while. And eventually responded, or at least chosen not to respond immediately, responded after a while. And somehow the lifespan of those memories ended up kind of still ricocheting in different ways for him 20 years on and things. And I want to know what parts of your work you find staying with you, something that you seem to kind of inherently want to keep reaching back to, and what parts end up kind of skimming the surface because it's part of work.
It's a difficult question, but it's a very good question. But I'll tell you this: there's a perfect parallel to what you mentioned about the painter and the photojournalist to the experience of Spiegelman and the regular editorial cartoons that we mentioned earlier when we chatted. Spiegelman had the leisure to reflect continuously on these disturbing images which he witnessed as the Twin Towers were collapsing. He said the eyeball was burning and the sensation didn't go away. Even music didn't help. And he took I think a couple of years to come out with this work. Daily cartoons doesn't have a cliche. So Mike Lukovich and Shapate and the rest of them, they were regularly producing work depending upon the way news was made on the same subject. This was the dominant news for several weeks and would also recur along with other news for the next several weeks and months and even a year or so. So that leisure is what Shapate had. So he was able to bring out the agony and find the right visual framework, creative framework to express that agony. That daily cartoonist doesn't have the leisure to do it, like the photojournalist. He has to just capture the moment and carry on. If I look at my work, my output is already done. Babri Masjid demolition. I have done my cartoon. I can't go back and do anything about that output. That is all archived. But some of the issues related to such topics that have touched you deeply, such issues will remain in the cartoonist. Otherwise, there is no difference between any news that is breaking now and another news that is breaking now. I have no control over that. And my reaction has to happen. I can't go back and talk about it, except as an allusion. That is where some of the finest editorial cartoonists, they are able to evoke this image. A typical image is when John F. Kennedy died. Maldin came out with this tribute cartoon. There was no John F. Kennedy in it. It was just the Lincoln Memorial drawn. Lincoln's head bowing in his hand. Nothing else. So the John F. K. to Lincoln, he was able to go back in memory to allude and connect and evoke certain images from the past. That kind of a thing is possible. In my work, I don't know. Ayodhya is a major turning point, which would have also, which would have probably shaped your view on politics for many years to come. It still stays with me. But the cartoon doesn't stay with me. I can't do anything about that cartoon. That cartoon is already done. So in the sense in which your painter hasn't painted it. So he can still paint in reflection. If I were to do anything like that, I would probably do a graphic novel on that, which I might. Emergency is another issue. Emergency happened before I was a professional cartoonist. I would surely, it always stays with me. The political event stays with me. Not my work. Work is immaterial, not work. Work is all gone. It's all part of the calendar, part of the archives. So these are the things that will probably stay with you. But you will not have the leisure to do this in a cartoon later, because that moment is determined by another set of events. Except, as I said, to probably allude to this. News cartooning is an environmental art. It's only possible in a certain environment. It is, again, I am able to do half the kind of work I am doing because I am working for a paper like the Indian Express. Because that newsroom is a certain culture of being with the news, being very sharp on the news, not being loud on the news. If you're completely loud on something, you don't need a cartoon, according to me. If you're a completely loud newspaper, you don't need a cartoon at all. You can scream. You can have a screaming headline and be done with it. Cartooning is what prompts the reader to be more tentative and less judgment about matters. It is not something that sort of gives you a thud or a kick in the face, though it might do that once in a blue moon. So that's what I'm saying. The kind of work I've been doing is partly because I am in this kind of a paper. Or in between, again, as you said, Hindu to the international, I had a very vital phase with the economic times, which was very fortuitous because that was the time economic reforms are happening in the country. And that's again another important aspect that will stay with me. Though it was not necessarily negative. Emergency and Babri Masjid is negative. This is a far more complex situation. A lot of positives and a lot of negatives. Some negatives. Narasimha Rao decided to break the economic bureaucracy, red tape. Some freeing up of the economy happened. Some entrepreneurship was unleashed and so on. Major thing that happened. I was with the Economic Times, I was in the right paper at that time. And Economic Times is also political. So I could see the politics of the reforms. I could follow it for the next 3 years. And since then I've been following it. So I had a head start over other cartoonists. Till then economic cartooning was merely, when prices went up, you would draw a cartoon saying the common man is it. And the same cartoonist will say that if oil prices go up, your petrol prices go up, they will say that it will create inflation, it will make your life miserable. When the oil pool deficit goes up, he will draw the similar cartoon criticizing the government, little realizing that the first is a way of curtailing the whole deficit. And complete semi-literate, economically semi-literate.
The Sensex.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, Sensex was later. Sensex, people became sensitive to the Sensex post-reform. Sensex came into cartoons post-reform, when ordinary people started investing in shares and so on. Till then there was nobody knew what the Sensex was. I'm saying it was post-reform that economic cartooning in India became slightly more mature. We began to understand what's happening. There were other issues like public sector versus private sector. Not just prices, there are other aspects to the economy. Like cutting subsidies is important even if the prices go up. Things like gold, how gold works in the context of, in the general context of currency, monetization and so on. All these things are becoming better and better appreciated now. I had a head start because I was with the Economic Times, and the Economic Times is very cartoon friendly. So I could use the cartoon to reflect some of these issues. That also will stay with me because whenever I do a cartoon on any of these topics, the fact, again urbanization, that 100 smart cities that cartoon I did, I think I was able to do it because of my tenure in the Economic Times. Such issues became eminently cartoonable. Urbanization. These are all issues that were not, as you said earlier, in the face political. Though ultimately they are all political.